Great. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Ryan Cagle with the Industrial Manufacturing Industry Partnership at New York City Mayor's Office of Talent and Workforce Development. Many of you may know us as MAKE, or the Manufacturing and Industrial Innovation Council. I'm very pleased to co-present this webinar today with our partners. We are joined by New York City Accelerator, the New York City Department of Buildings, and NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. The industrial sector is really quite diverse in New York City, and by our definition includes jobs in construction, media and film, manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, utilities, and wholesale. Combined, these industries represent over 500,000 jobs, which is roughly 10% of the total workforce here in our city. But not all of these businesses really see themselves as industrial. Many of you may identify as caterers, cold storage facilities, aerospace manufacturing businesses, food manufacturers, and more. And so my office at the Industrial Industry Partnership is really a resource for these industries to come together. We often act as the voice of industrial businesses within city government when the businesses are not in the room. And so I encourage all of you on the call today to reach out to me directly, to continue this conversation. We definitely want to hear about your experience and to help you identify opportunities where we can direct you to resources and support. Many of the resources you'll hear about today. I'd also like to give a quick plug to our network of industrial business service providers across the city. These organizations are contracted by Department of Small Business Services to provide direct business support to industrial businesses, and they're truly experts on industrial policy, lending, industrial real estate, and many of the other issues impacting the sector. And this goes for businesses large and small. So I'll share more of that specific information in the chat, but again, thank you for joining today's webinar. Thank you for all the partners on the call with us today. Really excited for this conversation. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Catherine from NYC Accelerator.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and welcome everyone. It's great to have you here. And to kick off our presentation this morning, I would like to introduce Holly Savoya, the Director of Sustainability Outreach and Assistance with the New York City Department of Buildings.
Good morning. Next slide, please. So to begin with Local Law 97, we're going to take a step back and go toward some of the laws that were passed under the Greener, Greater Buildings Plan. And those laws were passed in 2009, one of which is energy benchmarking, and then the New York City Conservation Code. Before that time, New York City was using the New York State Code. We also have Local Law 87, which is audits and retro commissioning, and Local Law 88 of 09. So benchmarking was originally for, benchmarking and Local Law 87 were originally for buildings that were 50,000 square feet and above. Local Law 87 is still for 50,000 square feet and above, but Local Law 84 was expanded to include those buildings that are above 25,000 square feet. Local Law 88 as well was expanded to buildings 25,000 square feet and above, and the deadline for Local Law 88 is January 1st, 2025, even though the law was passed in 2009. And this was done purposefully because most of the buildings that would be doing submetering have 10-year leases. So it gave plenty of time for buildings to implement the lighting upgrades and the submetering that were required. Just a note, we want to make sure that people understand that these laws, outside of the Energy Code, these laws were being enforced on the VBL level previously, but we are transitioning to a building or bin level, except in the instance where there are shared systems with the same owner. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background on Local Law 97. As you are aware, New York City has a very robust transportation system, so cars are not the reason for our emissions. Mostly it is buildings. About 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions in New York City are from buildings. And the Climate Mobilization Act, which is what includes Local Law 97 that was passed in 2019, is looking to dramatically reduce the emissions in New York City through buildings. And this law also aligns with the New York State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, also known as the CLCPA, as well as federal and international climate agendas. And if you look to the graph on the right, you can see that the baseline year is 2005, and the laws that we just discussed, in addition to transitioning off of oil or to different oils, was responsible for the first slope in this graph that you see going to present day. And then the middle slope that you see that's very dramatic, that is Local Law 97. So it's from 2024 through 2029. And then you see a further trajectory that goes down from 2030 to 2050, when the limits for 97 get stricter and stricter down to zero emissions in 2050. Next slide, please. So Local Law 97 has a few building guardrails. It's for buildings more than 25,000 square feet. It does account for different building types and sizes. There are special rules for affordable housing and houses of worship. And there's also relief in cases of financial hardship and unavoidable implementation hurdles. In addition, it also contains penalty mitigation and good faith efforts. So if you look at the timeline, the law was passed in 2019, an advisory board was quickly formed along with working groups. A report was prepared and submitted in the beginning of 2023. During that time, there was also an adjustments program that was passed. And originally that had a limited time during which you could submit, but that has been extended to the end of this year. There have been 2 rule packages that have been released, and we are looking for further another rule package to come out in addition to that. And so then we move to the first compliance period, where we are in what now. It started at the beginning of this year. And during that first compliance period, there are a set of limits. In the second compliance period, and so on and so forth, those limits become stricter and stricter. Next slide, please. So these are the compliance pathways for Local Law 97. So the first compliance pathway is Article 320. That's what we're going to be discussing today. And those are for private sector, non-rent regulated buildings who have to comply with the emissions limits starting this year, with penalties starting next year, and limits becoming more and more stringent from 2030 on. The second tranche of buildings are what we refer to as Article 321 buildings. And those are buildings that are rent regulated buildings or houses of worship, and they have a one-time compliance where they can either comply with the stricter 2030 limits now, or they can install prescriptive energy conservation measures. And they have a one-time compliance with their report submitted in 2025. And then the third set of buildings are those that are owned by the city or NYCHA buildings. They have somewhat stricter limits. The only difference with them is that instead of complying on a building by building basis, they comply in aggregate. Next slide, please. So Rule 103.14 is the rule that 320 buildings should be concerned with. And in that rule, there is guidance on how to calculate the emissions for your building, what the building emissions limits are, how it works, how to calculate gross floor area, information about the penalty framework and good faith effort, also information on beneficial electrification. And there's also guidance from the department on how the limits were transitioned from building code classifications to Energy Star portfolio manager property types. There's also guidance for reporting multiple buildings and campuses, and then how to address things like new buildings, changes in ownership, demolitions, and property type changes. Article 103.17 is what informs the Article 321 compliance. Again, those are rent regulated buildings and houses of worship. Next slide, please. So the building emissions limits are calculated such that you would take the given occupancy group or property type. In most cases, it's going to be the property type, but there is the ability to use the occupancy group for 2 years. You would take each space in your building, and you would measure out the square footage, and then you would multiply that by the limits that is assigned to whatever that space use is. So, and then you would sum up all of those calculations. So once you do that, you would get the one side of the equation, which contains what your limit for your building is. So you would want to work with a registered design professional and determine how much of your building is actually used for manufacturing, how much might be used for office space, how much might be used for cafeteria space, warehousing, storage, and so forth. Next slide, please. So on the other side of the equation, now that you know what your limit is, you want to calculate how much your building is emitting. So again, it's a summation of all of the different energy sources for your building. So you would take each energy source that you have coming into your building, natural gas, oil, electric, steam, and each of those sources, you would take the quantity multiplied by the emissions coefficient that's particular to that energy source. And then you would sum those all up, and then you have the other side of the equation. So if this side of the equation, the emissions, are higher than your other side of the equation, the limit, that's when you would have a penalty that would be assessed to you. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about buildings with shared energy service. So shared energy service comes into play when you have 2 or more buildings that share a service, or if they share a meter or another point of connection to the energy supply or the distribution system. So you can do, for those buildings, you can do a combined report, provided that they are both complying on the same compliance pathway. And what I mean by that is building 1 and building 2 must both be Article 320 buildings. So building 1 can't be Article 320 while building 2 is Article 321. Even though you would be submitting a combined report, you still have to calculate the annual building emissions limits for each of those buildings. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to show you how the limits are looking for the future. And if you look at the graph on the right, the gray line up at the top and the green line, those are oil and natural gas. And you can see that their coefficients are pretty consistent throughout all of the submission periods or the compliance periods. But if you look at the yellow is electricity. So that coefficient is dropping with each successive period. And along with that is district steam. So while the emissions limits are becoming stricter as the periods go by, the coefficients for electric are dropping. So that means that both sides of the equations that we just discussed are dropping. Whereas if you're on gasoline or natural or fuel oil, those coefficients are staying the same. So you're having the same on one side of the equation, but the emissions limit is becoming lower and lower on the other side, which means that there would be higher penalties. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is beneficial electrification. And the reason for that is what I just pointed out in the slide before then. And so what this says is that if you replace your fossil fuel equipment early, and by early, we mean as far back as 2021, you can, and you replace it with high efficiency space conditioning or water heating equipment, you can receive a credit to deduct the actual building emissions for the first or second compliance period. So in other words, anything that any of the emissions that are due to that equipment that you've just installed will be removed from your compliance submission. Not only once, but if you've installed it from any time from 2021 through 2026, you get a double credit for that. And then anything installed from 2027 through 2029, it's a single credit. So it just wipes out any emissions that are coming from that equipment. Next slide, please. Another thing we wanted to discuss were the adjustments programs. So the first adjustment program is 320.8, and that is for buildings with special circumstances. And what that means is that first you have to have you have to be more than 40% over the first compliance limit. So, and that's based upon your 2018 emissions. So if your 2018 emissions were more than 40% over your 2024 limit, you qualify initially for being one of these buildings with special circumstances. And there are other things that need to be met with, but the special circumstances in this regard apply to 24-hour operations that are critical to human health and safety, high density occupancy, and energy intensive communications technologies or operations, and energy intensive industrial processes typically classifies as unregulated loads under the energy code. Those are generally plug loads like computers and other plug loads. The other is for specifically and only for not-for-profit hospitals or healthcare facilities, so it's not applicable to manufacturing or industry. And the third is 320.7, which is about financial concerns, and that is the subject of future rulemaking. So I do urge you to stay vigilant on looking into that on our website and in our future announcements. Next slide, please. So one of the things, the way that the penalties work for Article 320, as I explained before, can be by your emissions limits, but you have to submit your report. So first and foremost, not submitting your report doesn't mean that you won't be subject to penalties. You'll actually be subject to, in most cases, larger penalties, because that penalty, if you don't submit your report, is the floor area of your building times 50 cents, and that's on a monthly basis. So if you have a 100,000 square foot building, you're paying $50,000 a month in penalties just for not submitting your report. So the big takeaway from today is please get in touch with an RDP and start looking at your building, start figuring out what your limit is, and start assessing what your emissions might be. The second is what we talked about before. If your emissions are greater than the limit that you've derived for your building, however many tons that is, you multiply by $268, and that's on an annual basis. So there are mitigation efforts. Mitigation opportunities exist for unexpected or unforeseeable events like a fire or some other act of God. The other thing is good faith efforts. So you can come to the department and enter into mitigation if you have submitted your report, you've complied with the benchmarking law, and you've complied with the lighting and submetering local law 88 law. Once you've done those three things, you also have to do one from the right side. So you either have to submit a decarbonization plan or one of these other measures that are here. Application that's approved by the DOB for work to be done, building out of electrification readiness, That would include things like getting a load letter from the utility, if you're a critical facility, and then the financing adjustment that was mentioned previously. Next slide, please. So the way that it works is if you submit your report and you are over your limit, you can either enter into mediated resolution with the department, which is a legally binding agreement, and that gives you an additional 2 years to come into compliance with your limits. If, however, after those 2 years, you are still not within your limits, the department has the right to apply penalties retroactively. The other pathway would be you are issued a violation. You can either pay it or you can go to oath and have it adjudicated at trial. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows you where we were based upon the 2022 benchmarking data. So when the law was passed in 2019, it was estimated that approximately 20% of the buildings in New York City would not comply. They would be out of compliance, and 80% would be in compliance and have no penalties. When the 2022 data for benchmarking came through, that figure changed to 89%. So compliance, which means that only 11% instead of 20% are out of compliance still. So the majority of buildings in the city are actually either taking a much better look at their benchmarking and making sure that there are no errors and that it's accurate and complete, or they're actually putting in measures to, improve their buildings so that they don't get a penalty. Next slide, please. And I think that's all we have for today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly. And thank you to those who are putting questions in the chat. The ones that are able to be answered during the presentations are done in the Q&A, but we'll also have a live Q&A at the very end with all three of us presenters. So I'm going to present next. My name is Catherine Willis. I am an account manager with the New York City Accelerator, and I'm here to tell you a bit about how the Accelerator can be of use for industrial and manufacturing buildings. So first, I'm going to start off with just a brief program overview to introduce you all to the Accelerator in case you've never heard of us or never worked with us. And then I'll move into more sort of offerings that the program has. Just to kind of piggyback off of some of what Holly was saying in terms of the city and its carbon decarbonization goals. Since we know that roughly 2/3 of our carbon emissions as a city come from our building stock, and we're trying to become carbon neutral by 2050, it's also important to note that 90% of the buildings that currently exist today will still be here in 2050. So while it's really important to, build decarbonized buildings, and we do have a new construction specialty within the Accelerator. So if you happen to be in construction or renovating and you want guidance on that, even for how to future-proof your buildings and become Local Law 97 compliant in the future, you can reach out to us for that. But we're also here to support that 90% of the building stock that will still be here as we approach carbon neutrality. And so the ways by which the city is going to achieve carbon neutrality is through building decarbonization policies like Local Law 97, but also by offering free technical assistance, which is where the Accelerator comes into play. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. And as well as economic development opportunities and a way to equitably transition away from fossil fuels as a city. So what is the New York City Accelerator? We are a city program out of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice to help control your energy costs, help you meet your compliance requirements for local laws like Local Law 97, and I'll mention a few other local laws that we can help you with a little bit later in the presentation too. Just generally boost your building's performance, increase your energy savings, increase your comfort, your tenants' comfort, and reduce carbon emissions across the city, which is why we're all here. So some of the ways we do that is we provide free technical guidance to help the market, in this case, the industrial and marketing sector, transform how buildings are both operated and built, as I mentioned. We can help you identify building upgrade projects to meet Local Law 97 emissions goals. We also have some no-cost building operator trainings that can help you or any of your staff achieve better green workforce development. And we also have within our program a network of vetted service providers who can, again, help you implement these decarbonization projects. And last but not least, and I will touch on a little bit on this and then hand it over to NYSERDA to mention more, we're here to help point you in the direction of applicable financial incentives and financing, including the New York City Accelerator PACE program. So who is eligible to work with us? As I imagine, many people here represent buildings that are 25,000 square feet or above, given that is a requirement for Local Law 97 compliance. But at the Accelerator, we actually work with any privately owned building within the 5 boroughs that is 5,000 square feet or above. Again, either currently in existence or soon to be through construction. And if you happen to have buildings that are smaller than 5,000 square feet, we can refer you to partner organizations that specialize with buildings of that size. So how does it work? You're going to call us or otherwise get connected. I will share some contact information at the end of my part of the presentation, and you will be assigned a dedicated account manager, someone like me, who will then talk you through your buildings and give you objective advice that is customized to your particular building's needs. And it always bears saying over and over again that this is a free program and there's no catch, no cost, no sign up or commitment. We're here to help you to whatever extent you want. This is just a, kind of illustrative example of what the typical customer experience might be. Right now, you're in phase number 1, you're learning about the program. After you get in touch with us, whoever your account manager is, will perform a buildings needs assessment and talk with you to help you decide on what sort of energy conservation measures you might want to pursue. Then, like I said, we can help you implement those measures through service provider referrals and or, information about applicable financing and incentives. And we're here to be in touch for as long as you want. You can get in touch with us at every phase of the process, even after the fact, to let us know how things are going. These are some of those other building laws that I want to mention briefly, and just a really great image from the New York City Sustainability Help Center, who's one of our other partners in addition to DOB and NYSERDA, to help illustrate how all of these local laws actually fit together and impact one another. So again, given that your buildings are likely 25,000 square feet or larger, you may have recently submitted your Local Law 84 benchmarking information this past May 1st, as you will continue to do, next May 1st and every year after that. And that results in your building letter grades. So, we can help sort of demystify some of that information for you. We also want to help buildings that are 50,000 square feet and above pursue their required Local Law 87 energy audits and retro-commissioning reports that are done every 10 years. And that can be, depending on the timing of that, if you have one coming up, even in the next 4 years, that can be a really good opportunity to use that mandated audit to then receive recommendations on how to decarbonize your buildings and be able to comply with Local Law 97 at the same time. So, and the NYSERDA FlexTech program that Maria will speak about in a few minutes may be able to help fund some of that process as well. Speaking of funding, as mentioned, we have financing specialists on staff who can help you understand the New York City Accelerator PACE program, which was established under Local Law 96, and the PACE financing, in addition to other incentives you might receive from Con Ed, National Grid, NYSERDA, and other entities, can help then fund the energy efficiency projects, which also might help you comply with local laws like 88, which have to do with being up to energy code for your lighting and submetering by the end of this year, but again, reported next year on May 1st. And local laws 92 and 94, which have to do with installing green roofs and or solar panels when you are completely reconstructing roofs. So we have solar specialists on staff. I'm going to mention a few solar incentives briefly at the end of my presentation, but all of that brings you then back around again to your benchmarking. And as you may know, benchmarking information, those that data about your square footage, the occupancy types, and your energy use each year can help inform calculations as to what your future local law 97 compliance might look like, if you're likely to be over your limit, under your limit, or where you might fall, and how that could impact you in terms of potential penalties. So I just wanted to quickly touch on a few incentives and other financing offerings that we are happy to help you with through the Accelerator program. As I mentioned, Con Ed and National Grid have different kinds of incentive programs depending on the sector within which your building falls. And NYSERDA, who's about to speak, has multiple programs to help with everything from clean heating to, multifamily, but also this FlexTech program that Maria will speak about. And there's the PACE program, and there are other financing through mortgage lenders that our financing specialists can speak to you about. So again, even though I know we're here to speak about industrial and manufacturing buildings, if you happen to also work with affordable housing, we have affordable housing specialists on staff. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you have any buildings that are 5,000 square feet or larger. And these are the solar specialty incentives that I wanted to mention. I'm not going to go into super detail because I'm not a solar specialist, but just to mention some of them: New York Sun, which is a rebate, currently the only upfront incentive that is available. And then there is the federal tax credit, which is part of the IRA, and the property tax abatement, which is obviously an abatement on your owed property taxes. So if you want a free solar feasibility assessment, because often industrial building roofs are somewhat ideal for solar installation, and they can impact your local law 97 compliance by deducting the kilowatt hours that are produced by your solar array from your overall energy use for the year. Get in touch with us. We will be happy to get you that free assessment, and then you can find out what the costs and benefits might be for your building. And last but not least, just wanted to mention that, like I said, our financing specialists can talk you through the PACE program and other energy efficiency financing strategies, which are changing. There's new things coming down the pipeline from the IRA, and it's important to be up to date with all of that, because that could obviously impact the ability to which you're able to implement certain energy efficiency and decarbonization measures. So here is that contact information slide that I mentioned. Just to verbally address it, yes, we have shared the slides in a folder that is linked in the Q&A chat, so check that out. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce the next speaker, who is Maria Cangiano, the Senior Project Manager for Multifamily at NYSERDA. So take it away, Maria.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and good morning, everyone. As Catherine shared, my name is Maria Cangiano. I'm a Senior Project Manager on the multifamily team with NYSERDA. And speaking, I understand that this is an industrial and manufacturing audience, but just to share, that I'm on the multifamily team, but happy to talk about these amazing programs that NYSERDA has. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the agenda, will just talk briefly about who NYSERDA is. As my colleagues here have said, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and a little bit about what we do. We'll talk about our FlexTech program, which thanks so much everyone for queuing that up. We'll also talk about our OSEM, or our On-Site Energy Manager program that we have, as well as our Green Jobs, Green New York program. And lastly, we'll just touch on the DOE IAC, the Industrial Assessment Center's implementation grant. Next slide, please. So NYSERDA, we all know New York State has pretty ambitious climate goals. So NYSERDA, we're a state agency, and as a state, New York is a global climate leader, hoping to build healthier futures for our communities. That includes all the sectors, multifamily, industrial, commercial, and at NYSERDA, we work with all of those different sectors and are happy to provide programs that will assist in all of those areas. We really want to advance clean energy innovation, and we're constantly looking for new technologies and new programs to assist customers and innovation within the state. And we provide resources, expertise, and objective information so that New Yorkers can make confident and informed energy decisions. Next slide, please. So first off, we've heard it all here. Happy to give some more information about our FlexTech program. It's our flexible technical assistance program. The funding amounts that I'll highlight here are for our commercial and industrial projects. So there's a 50% cost share for commercial projects and a 50 to 75% cost share for industrial projects. Just to highlight that for these programs, you have to apply before you can start an energy study or an energy assessment. So please to keep that in mind. There is funding available through 2025 on a first come, first served basis. And there is limited funding for industrial sites who do not pay into the SBC. So please to keep that in mind. We've made some changes at the end of last year to this program. If you are familiar with the FlexTech program historically, and now you are able to work with a FlexTech consultant or an independent service provider to take part in these energy assessments and audits. And again, this is open for multifamily, commercial, and industrial projects. For the technical assistance, just to highlight that industrial customers located in a disadvantaged community and/or industrial customers investigating electrification opportunities are eligible for up to 75% while funds are available. And the safety net hospitals and hospitals located in a disadvantaged community are eligible for up to 100% funding, up to $250,000 for a limited time. So to please keep that in mind. We've also put the FlexTech program website on this slide, as well as the general inbox. Next slide, please. This is a very detailed chart, but just to show and to highlight the different cost share amounts that are available for the different sectors and different, again, as I highlighted before, if it's a safety net hospital or if it's located in a disadvantaged community. So to please keep in mind that those are the cost shares and also the cost share cap per project as well. Next slide, please. Next up is our OSEM, or the On-Site Energy Manager program. This is a program that will support your site by offering a point person who can be the person who will assist with your energy assessments. This is an actual staff person that would be on site. This can be a full-time hire that you have through your company or through your organization, or this can be a hire from a consultant, and the consultant can be offering that support. This is a 75% cost share opportunity. There is an availability for an up to 100% cost share for industrials and commercial hospitals located in a disadvantaged community, and commercial hospitals meeting the safety net designation while funds allow. Again, those two sites. For more information on those two designations. The applicant may be the customer or the consultant. So the customer is the building or the organization themselves, and the consultant is the provider, the firm that is doing the energy assessment for your company. The engagement terms is that the engagement must be 20 hours minimum a week, and there is a minimum commitment of a year with up to 2 years for the 2 years max for the current program. A designated on-site energy manager can be a permanent hire or a contracted staff or a hybrid thereof. The caveat is that you cannot already have a dedicated OSEM on site, so to please keep that in mind. And then to the right, you see a chart, just the funding cap is based on the facility consumption, so to please keep that in mind when you are considering this program. And the bonus incentives, I'll speak a little bit more on the next slide, if you can please forward it. Thank you. Again, to reiterate that the OSEM can be fulfilled by a permanent staff member, a consultant, or a hybrid of the two. The payments will go directly to the consultant for the projects where the consultant is the applicant. Or it covers 75 to 100% of the costs associated with hiring or a full or a part-time on-site energy manager to assess energy conditions and identify energy efficiency improvements. The minimum time commitment of 20 hours per week for 1 year with a max time commitment of 40 hours per week for 4 years. The scope is general, so the OSEM can help on all manner of activities related to energy management and efficiency. We think that this would be a helpful additional staff person on at facilities that need that assistance. And the bonus payments that were referenced in the chart earlier, so those are 2 bonus payments of $5,000 for small projects and $7,000 for large projects, again, based on the facility energy consumption. If the OSEM is retained for 1 full year, following the conclusion of engagement of the previous bonus year, and energy savings identified and or installed of at least 1% over the previous year can be demonstrated. Again, I've listed the website with more information in case you're interested. Next slide, please. Next up, we've got more Green Jobs, Green New York. This is our program, which is a we call it like a prepackaged energy audit and assessment for small commercial and non-for-profits to identify and analyze opportunities to make buildings more efficient. This is the programs that are eligible to participate in this are small commercial. We define that as 100 full-time employees or less. Non-for-profit organizations of any size, and facilities must be 50,000 square feet or less. These studies include a comprehensive walkthrough of the facility, site staff interviews, utility bill analysis, fuel neutral, unbiased evaluation of potential low cost and no cost, and capital improvement energy efficiency upgrades, and an energy study report that outlines potential energy and cost savings opportunities for your facility. And to the right, you see the cost share amounts dependent, again, on the full-time employee status and the sector, if it is a commercial or if it is a non-for-profit. And again, the website for your reference. Next slide, please. And last but not least, we'll talk about the Industrial Assessment Center's implementation grants. So this is grants. This program grants awards of up to $300,000 per quarterly funding round. There are ongoing rounds, and I could speak to the upcoming one, which is in October. And this is available at a 50% cost share. The eligibility for this is exclusively for small and medium-sized manufacturing firms and water and wastewater treatment facilities. An SMM, or a small and medium-sized manufacturing firm, is defined as a manufacturer including water and wastewater treatment and controlled environment agricultural facilities with the following characteristics, either the most recently completed fiscal year or in the year of the assessment. So the gross annual sales must be less than 100 million, under 500 employees at the facility site, and annual energy bills of more than 100,000, but less than 3.5 million. The covered projects include an energy assessment report recommendations that improve the site energy or material efficiency, improve the site cybersecurity infrastructure, improve the site productivity, and reduce site waste production and reduce site greenhouse gas emissions. So a good opportunity and a good program to highlight in case any of those eligibility factors are applicable to you. And the next slide, please. Again, to be eligible, you must have had an energy assessment completed by an industrial assessment center or a CHP, the Combined Heat and Power Technical Assistance Partnership, now called the On-Site Energy TAPS, or a third-party assessor that provides an assessment equivalent to an IAC or CHP TAP assessment. Just to highlight that FlexTech program, NYSERDA is considered a third-party assessor. Participation process, so you can receive a free qualified assessment. Small to medium size manufacturers receive an energy assessment from a qualified assessor, and then you can apply for the grant funding. The manufacturer applies for an IAC implementation grant funding of up to $300,000 with a 50% cost share to implement the project recommendations from qualified assessments that we discussed on the previous slide. And then you can get selected and receive the grant funding. And the DOE selects and works with manufacturer to finalize the award size and provide you the documentation for the award. And after project implementation, you will submit an invoice and the DOE will receive, will send out the grant funding for you. Again, this is available on a quarterly basis, so the applications may be submitted at any time as the funds are available. And the next upcoming deadline is October 1st of this year. The next one after that is January 10th of 2025. If you can believe it, we're almost in 2025. And then the last slide is just my contact information. I'm happy to assist with any further questions if anyone has those, and happy to connect you with colleagues if there are specific questions that you have about any of the programs that I discussed today. Thank you so much for the time, and I'll open it up now for general Q&A.
Thank you, Maria and Holly and Ryan. Very informative, and I'm so glad this is being recorded so that people can refer to it in the future. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I know that Holly's been answering Q&A questions like a champ. So Ryan, are there any questions you want to highlight for us to answer on camera?
Well, I think I did want to address a couple of people have mentioned, can we have the Q&A as included in the follow-up materials? Are we able to provide that as a text resource?
That's a good question. Justin?
Yeah, we should be able to circulate that as well.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah, very informative text, lots of websites and links and information. So definitely part of the presentation.
Thanks for that. And then Holly, definitely thank you for answering those questions in the chat. I do see 2 questions that are outstanding. Are you able to address those live or?
So I believe one question was about the electric coefficient, and that is not under DOB's authority. So I can't answer that question. And I think the other question was not for me, I believe.
Okay, I'm seeing a new one from Jason. Wanting more on manufacturers that have high energy usage due to their products instead of HVAC.
Mm-hmm. So,
and I think that's similar to Leah's question too. You know, is there any effort being made to factor out the high energy usage due to product instead of HVAC?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So DOB is continuing to study the manufacturing industry, but I don't have anything to report at this time.
Very good. There's a new question about medical labs with high energy usage, imaging machines. How are medical labs or are medical labs different from your typical manufacturing building? So sorry if I'm putting you on the spot here. The full question was how medical labs with high energy usage imaging machines are dealt with in local law 97 as process loads. I think maybe that individual's typing on their phone. It's a little bit hard to understand.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I would say, if there's a question that people have, that we can take back to, I can take back to my colleagues, they would be best served if they would email ghdemissions@buildings.nyc.gov. I put that address in the chat, and they can send their question there, and then, I can take that back and get an answer to them.
Holly, I think one question I have that I think is important is can you articulate and expand on the difference between the reporting requirement and a decarbonization plan? Because those are separate documents, correct?
They are separate,
Right.
but they would be submitted at the same time by May 1st. So your submission, your report is basically saying, this is what my limit for my building is, my calculated limit, and this is what my calculated emissions are for my building. And our emissions are over our limit. As such, we are proposing to enter into mitigation with the department. And here is a decarbonization plan that shows how we intend to get to our goals, including, what methods, what means, how they're going to be financed, and the time frame for doing those. But they are separate documents, but they would both be submitted at the same time.
And you discussed penalties for not submitting the reporting.
Right.
Is there a penalty for not submitting the decarbonization plan?
There's no penalty for not submitting a decarbonization plan, but it is one of the additional measures that are a requirement for entering into mitigation with the department.
Got it. Right. Let's give your voice a rest here for a second. Maria, does NYSERDA provide consulting services for the IRA and 179D commercial buildings energy efficiency tax deduction? That's from Thomas at Wide Sky.
Yes, thanks so much. I'm not aware of that, but again, I work on the multifamily team, so there may be a program that I'm just not familiar with. But I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you can just email me directly, Thomas, then I'll get back to you. Thanks.
Great. I love the very detailed questions. There's a lot of expertise on the call, we can tell. So I think this is an interesting one, and Catherine, we've discussed this a little bit. What about businesses that lease? So here we have, if I lease the property, which works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, uses a great deal of electricity from the freezer. So I imagine this is cold storage facility. Is it the owner's responsibility to file or the tenant's?
That's a great question. So generally speaking, and Holly, correct me if I'm wrong, but local law 97 typically falls on the owners to report on behalf of the building, similar to how benchmarking and other things are done. However, in terms of the compliance, there may be, you should definitely review your lease. And the accelerator has a growing legal service provider sector within our network that we can point you towards for information on green leasing, which might help share the responsibilities and benefits of decarbonization measures in a given building. But I would imagine that even when it comes to adjusting, or filing, an adjustments application, that would still be an owner responsibility. And I just kind of wanted to also touch on the adjustment question, saying to ask Holly, is there sort of a percentage of adjustment that if an adjustment application is successful, a building might achieve, or is it on a case-by-case basis?
Right, so for 320.8, which is the buildings that are more than 40%, their 2018 emissions are more than 40% over their 2024 through 2029 limit. If they receive an adjustment, it's 70% of what their 2018 emissions were. So that would be their limit for 2024 through 2029.
Got it.
Yeah.
Is that helpful, Ryan?
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Catherine, is there a website where specific steps for mitigation, excuse me, I think the question got bumped, but is there a website people can go to for specific steps for mitigation?
So that's where working with an account manager comes into play, because obviously every building is a snowflake, and we want to help you figure out what those steps might be in your particular case. So you can definitely get in touch with the accelerator. We can talk through what you have done perhaps, or what you might be able to do. That's also why I'm so glad that Maria was here to speak about the NYSERDA FlexTech program, because as you may have seen on that slide, industrial buildings in particular can get 50% off of the cost of a study done by a registered design professional, i.e. an engineer or architect, who can go through your entire building and give you specific recommendations on how to comply with local law 97, and that cost share actually goes up to 75% for buildings located within a disadvantaged community, which you can easily find that map by Googling disadvantaged community NYSERDA and plugging in your address. And many industrial buildings in the 5 boroughs are in those disadvantaged communities. So if they're in that blue part of the map, then you would qualify for like more like a 75% cost share.
I think we're right up against time here, but maybe one more question, because I think it's an interesting discussion. That high temperature industrial heat pumps are not going to be a reality, that the attendee writes, until year 2026. What is being done at the state level to support and encourage manufacturers' technology available in Europe to reach the US?
I know that Con Ed has, clean heat incentives available because of, that being the electric utility within the state. Maria or Holly, did either of you want to add anything to that? Okay, well, again,
yeah,
get in touch with the accelerator, because there are new incentives that are coming down the pipe from IRA, in the near future. So we may be able to expand on that and also look at other, opportunities.
And that was my sense. I think really a lot is being done to get us there technologically. There are great resources at NYSERDA. The FlexTech program can connect to all kinds of extremely qualified consultants. Not to mention the free resources, things like IAC and so on. The on-site program. There are a lot of resources that can help businesses identify real and viable ways to decarbonize. And so I think it's a good question, and I think it really illustrates what an exciting challenge and opportunity this truly is.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Again, you can feel free to get in touch with any one of us, but on behalf of the accelerator, I welcome you to email info@accelerator.nyc. All of these questions can be touched on and or directed to other experts within the New York City sphere to help you with these.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.